The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling this hearing. Homelessness is not something that's on the radar every day, but it's a massive problem, and I don't think anyone's districts are completely immune from it. Ms. Lilly, I think your written testimony and your verbal testimony may be some of the most compelling that I've heard so far. Thank you very much for that. I love Family Promise. My wife and I became aware of it, and we work through our church, and I know it's effective. I know what you're saying is the truth. It's another example of how much more productive, efficient, and effective privately operated functions can be than government monolithic, one-size-fits-all, you're in or you're out structures that clearly have not seemed to have worked very well, or there wouldn't be a need for so many of the other organizations such as yours. A question that demands an answer after reading all of your testimony, a couple times actually. How did you break the cycle? How did you free yourself and your family?
I was supported by Family Promise, and so I'm actually the deputy director of the organization that served my family 4.5 years ago. And so it was the support that allowed me through that process, and they extended a lot of grace to me. Emergency shelters generally will time a family out after 90 days and ask them to exit and then reapply if there's availability. I stayed in shelter straight for more than 6 months. I did receive assistance through rapid rehousing on the back end of shelter to be able to house my family, and that supported me on my trajectory forward. Once I exited the shelter and was stably housed, I wanted to give back, and so I started volunteering with Family Promise. A year after exiting shelter, I became a staff member and have just kind of climbed up the ranks ever since, and homelessness has kind of become my life since. I think it's important to recognize in my personal story that I received some assistance that was HUD funded that helped me overcome my situation. It was after 6+ months in shelter. It was after an extreme amount of time of struggling. My special boy, during my homeless situation, had 2 more long-term hospitalizations because the process is stressful for him, as it was for me. But that HUD funding that helped me get back on my feet, I was able to utilize it before that 6-month mark. However, when you're looking at rapid rehousing, I had to qualify for a landlord that was willing to take those funds and my family. As you can imagine, a lot of landlords look at an application and say, currently homeless, 6 kids, lower income than it used to be a year ago, and they go, I think I'll pass, especially when you're in communities with low vacancy. And so it took a long time for me to find a landlord willing to work with me, which is why that may not have been the most effective across the board intervention that we're offering to families.
How would you specifically suggest we redefine homeless eligibility at HUD?
Specifically, I think that we need to broaden the definition to align with other federal systems. We need to include the families that are doubled up. We need to include the families that are living in a motel. They are not stably housed. Most of these parents are out trying to figure out how they're going to pay for the motel room tomorrow. They're not sure how they're going to stay with a friend another week longer. They're sitting in bedrooms on floors with their children, telling them that they can't cry, telling them that they can't access the refrigerator because it's not their food. It's not a housing situation. It's a floor. It's a cot. It's a blanket. And it's not acceptable. We have to expand it. We have to truly work to serve the most vulnerable and acknowledge that just because a family has 4 walls around them, that doesn't mean that they're not vulnerable. There's a lot of assumptions that go into the Alliance saying that we're not, this expands it and we're no longer going to be serving the most vulnerable, that they haven't done the research to back up. These families are vulnerable, they are being victimized, and they deserve a spot in the line for resources based on their vulnerability.
If you could make one change besides the definition, what would that be?
I would allow communities to be able to use the resources that best fit their community dynamic and the current housing dynamic of that community. So if transitional housing is effective in a community and proven effective in a community, that HUD not prioritize it being defunded.
Thank you. I see my time's up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back to turn